Well, good evening, Rotarians and all the colleagues in peace. I am Jim Alderman, the chair of our District 5450 Peace Committee that sponsors the Forum for Discussion. We are so pleased to have Linda Lowe bring her expertise to us for our time together this evening or morning, depending where you're from. She is all-in-demand speaker for Rotary activities, recently speaking in Turkey at the Rotary's International Peace Conference. She could not have known what events would bring when she took a position as the communications manager for the Europe region of the International Federation of Red Cross 10 years ago, 2015. Shortly after she started her new job, the migration crisis began to overwhelm Europe. Linda saw the waves of migrants and heard their stories firsthand. This challenging experience sparked her desire to help communities in conflict and ultimately led Linda to the Rotary Peace Center at Duke University, where she studied the connection between the environment and peace. We are so excited as recently she was recognized by Rotary International and received the Champion of Peace Award. Linda, the screen is yours.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to see you. I realize we're probably across different time zones. Might be dinner time, might be nap time, but and I know somebody from Poland, it's the middle of your night. So grateful that you come to be in community with us today. Jim told me that I have about 35 minutes to share. So I'm going to walk you through a PowerPoint presentation to tell you my story of how I got involved in Rotary and these leadership dialogues that I've been doing to decrease polarization. I'm going to keep it sort of informal and light and then just open it up to conversation with everyone. And so if it's all right with you, I'm going to share my screen, Jim,
Certainly.
and go from there. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go. Oh, yeah. Okay, so as Jim said, my name's Linda. I was a Rotary Peace Fellow at the Duke UNC Rotary Peace Center from 2016 to 2018. And if you're not familiar with the Rotary Peace Center's programs, I'm happy to get into that a little bit later. But just want to say first, thank you for your support to the Rotary Foundation, because through the foundation, you make it possible for these peace centers to exist and for peace fellows like myself to dive deeper into peace building and then go back out in the world and do hopefully better things. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, as I said, a little bit about my Rotary journey and then the dialogues. So I'm Canadian by nationality. I'm Chinese by ethnicity. I began my American life when I married a great guy. When I was at actually Duke and UNC studying, I dated a guy and thought, I'll just, have some fun dating this guy. And then I ended up marrying him. That's funny how life goes, right? So, and I'll say my American life is a really beautiful life. I've mentioned at the top that I live in Seattle in this like total hippie enclave called Fremont. It's a creative arts hub. And, I kind of joke with my friends that I could just never leave this small community that I'm in. We're like a little village right beside downtown Seattle, because it's really a beautiful place. And we really feel like we belong. And I will say that this feeling of belonging that we have here is in some ways counterintuitive because, or against the odds, because we moved to Seattle in January of 2020, which was 6 weeks later, the city of Seattle shut down because of COVID. And then many other cities across the country and towns did the same. Don't know if you remember that, 5 years ago, so much life happened since, but remember those times, it was scary, right? Um, our living rooms became the centers of our universe. It was very isolating. And especially if you're in a new place, it can feel extra isolating. It's the opposite of belonging. But what was beautiful about our situation is we had 6 bright lights that orbited us. I live in a townhouse, and there's 4 townhouses, and we share a little square. So, there's a townhouse on each corner, and we share a little square. And so these are my neighbors back during the COVID times. What we did was once a month, We met in our little square and we had a potluck. We became each other's safe social bubble. Whether it rained, and you know it rains a lot in Seattle, whether it was sunshine, whether it was snow, we were out there once a month creating community. And you probably can't see it through the masks, but at the time, all of our neighbors were sort of in their 80s and up. They literally had lived in these townhouses for years and years. And so when we moved in, we were like the fresh young blood. And everybody was very excited we were there. And we became family. We shared joys, we shared heartbreak, and we created, as I said, family. We felt like we belonged. And so before I move forward with the rest of my presentation, I'm going to ask all of you a question, invite you to answer it in your mind, and then I'm going to ask you to hold on to that question because I'm going to come back to it later. So my question to you is this: do you feel like you have a place where you belong? I'm going to ask you that question again to sort of think about in your mind. Do you feel you have a place where you belong? And so hang on to that question because I'm going to come back to that at the end of my sort of conversation with you. Before I start to get into my story about my leadership dialogues and they're sort of being positioned now as sort of dialogues that enable peace building and belonging, I'm going to take you on a bit of a road trip with me back in time and then to the present, and then to the future. So right now I'm going to take you back to the 1970s, um, to a small town called Kelowna, British Columbia. It was a population of 20,000 people. It's a small town in British Columbia, Canada, where I grew up. My parents had that one Chinese restaurant. They called it Ruby's Restaurant, and that's my beautiful mom there, and me being mischievous. My parents immigrated from Hong Kong and China, and they did the thing they know. They cooked. They opened this restaurant, and they called it Ruby's Chinese Restaurant. This was a time when we just, of course, we were younger and the world just felt more free. You know, I grew up in that restaurant. I played hide and seek in that restaurant. As I got older, I bussed the tables. I became a waitress. I hostessed all the things. And this restaurant was economic stability for my family and mobility. You know, we moved from a basement suite to a dimly lit basement suite to our own house one day. This restaurant is the reason why I was able to go to college and my brothers after me. I'm kind of painting what's probably seen as the American dream, you know, climbing out of poverty, but it wasn't always smooth. You know, I saw my parents, English was not their first language. And so I saw, you know, a lot of the indignities and challenges my parents faced because of language barriers, racial barriers. They didn't know how to maneuver the system. I quickly became their English language voice to the world. And at that time, you know, if you're an immigrant in a new country and you can't understand the language and there's all these pressures you have, there's not really dialogue in the family. There's just, you know, this feeling of survival. But I want to tell you that I'm hoping you all have had this in your life. There's sometimes that one person that makes the decision, one action that changes the course of your life and possibly your entire family's life. And for us, that was a woman named Billy. Before my parents opened this restaurant, which made all of these amazing things possible for me and my half brothers, my mom worked in a local restaurant and she waitressed. And there was a regular that came in every single day. Her name was Billy. And they became friends. And my mom said to her one day, yeah, you know, we really want to open our own restaurant, the one that you see now in this picture, but we can't because we don't have something called collateral assets. Banks will only loan money, as you know, if you have assets. And so Billy said, how much do you need? And mom said, we want to borrow $15,000. So in the 1970s, that was the equivalent of $100,000 today. And Billy just said, I'll loan it to you. I mean, what? My mother and my father couldn't believe it, right? Who loans their local waitress the equivalent of $100,000? Well, Billy did. That's who did that. And after my parents opened their restaurant when I was a kid, every week we'd drive over to Billy's. And I thought it was to visit. Of course it was to visit. But I also remember them always bringing an envelope with them. And I now know as an adult that in that envelope contained money, right? They were paying Billy back week by week, bit by bit, every day or every week. And if Billy hadn't been the generous person that she was, if she hadn't seen this promise in my parents, I probably wouldn't be here presenting to you today, or maybe even part of Rotary. I probably would have had a very different trajectory. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Ruby's was my path to economic stability for the 10 people it employed. It was my ticket to college. Um, I say this to tell you my background because it's important to my story and where I stand on certain points, on certain issues like immigration, like small business policies, all these things. I'm going to get more into that a little bit later. But before I get segue to that, I'm going to talk to you about one more thing, and that's the International Red Cross, which Jim mentioned at the top of the call. Billy changed my family's life. And when I started working for the Red Cross or the Red Crescent, that changed my life even more. So there's a Red Cross or a Red Crescent in nearly every country in the world, American Red Cross, Turkish Red Crescent, Spanish Red Cross, Iraqi Red Crescent, so on and so forth. And I started out my Red Cross journey as a volunteer with the Canadian Red Cross for a number of years. And I applied for a job with the International Red Cross in Geneva as an English language editor, which is just so amazing, right? I came from my immigrant parents who didn't speak any English at all when they came, and now I'm the English language editor at the International Red Cross. I thought it'd be a 1 year, like, amazing European adventure, and it turned into actually 6 years. I worked for the Red Cross for 6 years, and I went in not necessarily immediately with 48 hours after a disaster, but I normally got sent in the year after the headlines are gone, after the new reporters have left. I normally got sent in a year later to continue to tell people stories because, as we know, um, communities take not just 1 year to recover, sometimes years, sometimes generations. So I was sent in to bear witness to what was happening, um, seek people's stories and share them back to the world, to people like you and I and government policymakers and funders, to keep the light shining on these communities that still need support to rebuild. When I was there, I want to say my time with the Red Cross changed me and shaped me in ways I could not imagine, and still to this day, as I think back about the experiences I had there, and the people I met, and the communities that invited me in. It was such an honor that they trusted me with their really personal stories, and then also trusted me with the responsibility of sharing their stories back to the world. And one assignment in particular has always stayed with me. I was in Japan in 2014, 3 years after Japan experienced this triple disaster. I don't know if you remember it. There was a 9.0 earthquake, then a tsunami, then a nuclear disaster. In 2011, it took 20,000 lives immediately, and so much more. So I was sent there 3 years later to continue to report back on what was happening. I walked through these uh, villages with a Geiger counter around my neck that monitored the radiation levels around me. It was so surreal. And then I remember this one moment so clearly. I remember standing in the middle of this deserted town. It was completely abandoned. And like you could hear, if there were crickets, you would hear them, right? But there was nothing. And I realized in that moment that the people that used to live there, they were never going to come back. This town would never be inhabited again, at least not in my lifetime. Because after the disaster, radioactive material seeped into the ocean, into the local lands. People who made their living fishing couldn't fish. Farmers couldn't sell their produce, because people were afraid to eat contaminated food. Thousands of people were evacuated because of radiation. People lost their homes, their jobs, all these horrible things. And at the end of this assignment, I visited a camp for displaced people. They were living out of temporary homes made of cargo containers, also to listen to their stories and bring their stories back to the world. And these people, they spoke of their sadness, of their loss. They lost loved ones, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they lost their dignity, their productivity. They talked about how the camp they lived in was chaotic at first. And these stories of heartbreak were really expected, sadly. But what was unexpected was this community that I saw being built all around me as I stood in this displaced sort of community of people. As I stood in the middle of it all, I saw exercise classes for elderly people in one part of the camp. I saw a bulletin board with activities for kids after school in another part. I saw an announcement for a community meeting. And in the middle of this, beside somebody's cargo container that she was living in, a Japanese woman was growing these tomatoes inside a big planter box. And this moment was so beautiful because, earlier that morning, so this was maybe I don't know, 4 in the afternoon, whenever the sun was out. Earlier that morning, I had literally been standing in a deserted town where, you know, people had left and could not eat the food that they had farmed in those lands because the dirt that I stood on was poisonous. And here in this camp, people are planting edible, healthy food again. And what I saw was resilience. What I saw was this feeling of belonging that was starting to happen. And, there were still, of course, so many hurdles that these people had to bear and probably still are bearing. Because when you survived catastrophe, when you don't have a place to call home, when resources are scarce, there's going to be tension and conflict, which is why in those times it's even more important to foster dialogue and create belonging. And so when I was with the Red Cross, I was sent to places like Ukraine, Hungary, Haiti, coordinating with the Red Crosses and Red Crescents across borders because we know that disasters don't understand borders. There's no border when it comes to climate crisis or, flooding or earthquakes or things like this. And I learned one of the biggest things I learned is that all of these crises that I bore witness to, they were really rooted deep in history, meaning the narratives and traditions and stories that are shared over time, over generations, which define people's communities and their values and their identities. Like us here, we all belong to Rotary. We feel that common identity and share common values. And what I'll say is, through these experiences, I came to really understand that if I didn't take time to really understand someone's history and their community history, then I wouldn't understand their points of view and the choices they make or the policies that they back up when they show up in public at a town statement or post on Twitter or whatever. If I hadn't taken time to share my story with you, my immigrant story, then which really influences, as I said earlier, my personal views on immigration, policies that support small business and all these things. If you hadn't heard that background, how would you know what was behind a statement if I stood up in a town hall and said, we need better policies to support small businesses? The depth behind the personal experience is so important, is my belief, when we are trying to create belonging, trying to create dialogue, trying to build peace. And so with that, I'm going to talk a little bit and I'm going to segue to to dialogue for peace building. So as Jim mentioned, after my time with the Red Cross, I received a scholarship to be a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I moved to Duke or Durham, North Carolina, in the middle of August. So imagine I was in Geneva with my beautiful dog that I had adopted that you saw earlier in a picture, and packing my bags, hoarding lots of Swiss chocolate. And I got on a plane with my dog and I had landed in Durham, North Carolina in August. It was August of 2016. It was hot. It was sticky. It was 3 months before a really big presidential election. Um, and I know you know which one I mean. So I'm going to take you back to that moment, which might be a bit stressful. But I want to invite you to travel back with me to November 2016, or if you want to be closer in time, to November of last year. And I want to ask you to think about this in your mind. On the night of either of these elections, do you remember where you were? Maybe who you were with, maybe how you felt. Um, and then a few weeks later, when it was Thanksgiving, what was that like? Were you with friends or family? Are you still friends with those friends? I'm gonna tell you, I remember every single one of those moments before arriving into Durham in 2016. I'd been away from North America for 6 years, and I really did not have a sense of what was happening in the United States. I'd sort of viewed the United States through shared sort of pop mainstream music and movies. That was my understanding, and I thought, oh yeah, we have lots in common, Canadians and Americans. And then I also didn't understand the deep legacies of what was happening the deep South. And I know some people argue that North Carolina is not the deep South, but it was certainly the deepest that I had ever been, having not been to North or South Carolina. And now I understand the heavy history and legacies that reside there because of slavery and all these things. I just didn't know the political hotbed that I had arrived in. Um, what I want to say is I got really curious, because when I arrived, there was so much conflict and anger and tension. And this is what I arrived to, right? I don't know if you remember these moments or these images. Maybe these are reflective of images in your community. But yeah, there was so much tension and anger. And I was curious, what is happening? What is driving all this tension? Remembering again that I was fairly new to the environment. And then I received an assignment as part of my peace studies as a peace fellow, where we were asked to tackle a local issue with global impacts. And I knew exactly what I wanted to explore, this polarization, because I really believe that what happens to the United States happens to the world. And I think we're seeing that now, right? We've seen that throughout history and we're seeing that now. So I wanted to dig deep. What's causing this friction? And everyone that I asked said to me, we can't have civil discourse anymore. We can't talk to each other. We're so polarized. So I asked the question, what makes effective dialogue? I interviewed over 100 people, professional facilitators, policy experts, community leaders, young people, and so on. I said, what in your experience makes effective dialogue? And through these conversations, I sourced really innovative facilitation techniques unlike any I had ever experienced before. Techniques that really invite people to listen deeply and to step into someone else's shoes and own their stories and then reciprocate with really honest dialogue. I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite techniques. It's called third to first person. And it was created by a wonderful nonprofit called Narrative 4. And how it works is if we were to do a third to first person dialogue right now, I'd split you up into pairs and I'd ask you a question. So maybe that question I asked at the top, tell us about a time when you felt like you belonged, or tell us about a time when you felt like you didn't belong. Um, and then you'd go away in your pairs and you'd take time to share your stories with each other. You'd answer that question. And then we'd reconvene in small groups of probably 10 people, small circles of 10 people. And then I'd say, okay, you heard your partner's story. Now I want you to tell your partner's story like it's your own. You have to own their story. So if Jim was my partner and Jim told me, about a time when he felt like he didn't belong, when we all regrouped in our groups, I would say, "Hi, my name is Jim, and this is the time when this happened and I felt like I didn't belong." And when I was done, he would say, "Hi, my name is Linda," and so on and so forth. And the point here is when you have to own someone else's story, you listen really differently. It's less about inserting your own point of view and feeling accountable to listening to your partner's point of view so that you are, representing their story authentically and factually, and respecting sort of the lived experience that they're sharing with you and projecting it back to the world on their behalf. So that's that technique is really powerful. I've seen it immediately break down walls and set the stage for just deeper dialogue immediately. Um, Also, the thing about asking these types of questions is they're very open-ended and they don't ask you to say yes or no. They ask you to simply share an experience, which normally informs your point of view. I remember being witness to a dialogue about gun rights or gun policy in a community, and the facilitator asked people, tell us about a time when you or someone you know has been affected by a gun incident, or when you heard a story in the news or in your community that really stayed with you deeply. And I heard stories about, people wanting to protect themselves when they felt in danger, or people being harmed by gun violence. And nowhere in there did the facilitator say, how do you feel about gun policy? Should it be, more stringent, less stringent? I'm pretty sure when we hear people's stories about their experiences with gun incidents, we probably know where they stand, whether or not they're for or against gun control. The final example that I'll share with you before I move on is a really great example called values. So normally, and we do these dialogues in in Zoom as well, virtually and in person. But because I'm sharing my screen right now with you, I cannot see what you're going to type. But I don't know, Jim, if you can maybe help me out. I'd like to invite everyone here to type into the chat box a value that is important to you. Don't overthink it. Just type a value that's important to you. I'm going to invite you to do it one more time. Please type a value that's important to you. Don't overthink it. Name one value that's important to you. Um, and if we were in person, I'd actually be handing out paper plates and pens and asking you to write down the value and actually put it down on the floor. We'd all be sitting in a giant circle, all 21 of us. And I'd ask you to write down the value and put it on the floor so everyone can see it. And I don't know, Jim, is it possible to maybe read out a few of the values that are being populated in the chat? Or if not, Jim, anybody else?
I'd be happy to.
Great.
I see truth, trust, honesty, truth, courage, honesty, honesty.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating in that. Isn't that amazing how we share so many common values? And then if we were to get into a dialogue about an issue that's particularly thorny, I would probably say to you all, okay, these values, look, there's so much in common. Can we use these values to guide our conversation if things get heated, if things get loud, um, if things get passionate? And absolutely everyone says yes. These are the values that we will use to guide our conversations so that later in the conversation, if it's something about, a hot issue like the gun control or something else, and if we're starting to get heated, I can say, hey, everyone, remember these values? Can we respect each other? Can we trust each other? Can we be honest with each other? And so what we've done, I mean, I'm going to assume that you're all, if I asked you that question, you'd say yes. Normally people do. And then what we've done is we've created an informal social contract with each other about how we're going to have this conversation moving forward. And the great thing about physically typing it in a chat or writing it on a paper plate is you're physically committing to it, right? By actually writing it down. You're making a statement already by doing that. But anyway, I'm going to take us back to 2016 and talk to you about the very first dialogue I did. So I interviewed all these people, I researched all these really unique techniques. I packaged them together and put them together in a proposal or a document, if you will, and submitted it and thought, okay, well that's great. I'm going to move on. I'm super busy. I have things to do. And people started calling me back and emailing me back and saying, hey, when are we going to do this dialogue? And I remember thinking, I'm not doing a dialogue. Are you doing a dialogue? So this was in, 2017 by then. And people said, Rotarians said, we'll sponsor the lunch. Duke said, we'll give you free space. Another nonprofit said, we'll provide buses so people have free transportation so they can participate. And my fellow Peace Fellows at that time, there was 10 of us each year that joined the program, said, we'll facilitate, let's do it. And I remember being so shocked, like, wow, why do people want to do this? And then I realized because it was something they could do. They were feeling helpless. I think some of us, I know I sometimes feel helpless right now in the world we live in too, but it was like this way of taking action and doing something to tackle this polarization. And so we implemented this pilot dialogue. We did a 2-day workshop with 70 people. We recruited people across different political disciplines, i.e., to the left, to the right, and in between. And how we got people from across the political spectrum was we engaged with champions on the other side of the issue. So I think it was like the president of the Republican Association, the president of the Democratic Association, whatever. And, we sort of had coffee with them and said, what do you think? Do you want to tackle this with us? Because remember at that time, the polarization, I don't want to say it was new, but it was the first time it was so visible. And I know now we live in a state of polarization, but back in 2017, it felt fairly new, quote unquote. Anyway, and so when these different voices on these different issues said, yes, I'm in, they brought other people with them from their communities. So that's how we got such diverse voices in the room. And what I will say is I'm not exaggerating when I say the experience was transformational. So many participants who had felt defeated and polarized, they walked away from that workshop saying they felt understood, they felt like they themselves felt heard. 90% of the people that participated, because we, did a poll, said that the forum changed how they will approach dialogue in the future. And these are some of my favorite sort of qualitative quotes that we got, because we left an open-ended sort of section in the survey about, tell us more about your experience. Things like, I heard a different perspective I didn't consider before. I'll change the way I listen. And this is always my favorite. And I hear this again and again at so many dialogues I do. I didn't expect to learn so much from other people. I didn't expect to learn so much about myself as I reflected on what other people had to say. Um, so I thought that this dialogue would be it, that I think I was kind of joking at the top before we kicked off formally that this facilitating dialogues in communities has become a lifestyle for me, very unexpected. I didn't understand that there was this need in communities. But anyway, we did this one dialogue and I thought, okay, that's it. That was extraordinary. And now I've got to get on with my life. And instead, what ended up happening was Rotarians, Rotary clubs called saying, can you facilitate a dialogue at like RILA? Can you facilitate a dialogue in our club? Then nonprofits locally started calling or emailing and saying, can you facilitate a dialogue? We're having an issue about like land rights here in this community, for example, or an issue about who has access to healthcare in this community and these types of things. And so this one-off dialogue back in 2017 has now spurred sort of a bit of a movement. I've trained like at least 100 other people to facilitate, and I now have like a network of facilitators across the country and in other parts of the world, and we literally come together and host or facilitate dialogues when a community wants to host one. So the community organizes it, and then we facilitate it in partnership with them. And my network of facilitators, we come together based on sort of geography and need. So as an example, I was in Durham and Charlotte last year doing 2 different dialogues, and there's a bunch of facilitators I've trained there. So I called on them, we came together and facilitated. Or last year here in the state of Washington, in Olympia, which is a city, they wanted to do a dialogue on housing and homelessness. So I pulled on some facilitators that I've trained here. Or this morning, I was actually on a call with a Rotaract group in Spain because they want to do a dialogue over there. Why am I saying this? If you're interested in hosting dialogues in your communities, let's stay in touch. Would love to support you with all the spare time I have and all the spare time you have. I also get asked a lot, what have I learned? I've learned so much. It's such a gift to come into communities and hear them and listen to them and hear their stories. It's such a gift, again, to be trusted with that very deeply personal information. Aside from that gift, I'll say what I've learned is we lived in a world of position statements, news headlines, social media posts that really force us to take a point of view on a position without diving deeper and hearing someone's story or lived experience. Just like I shared with you, what are the things that what are the things that influences my points of view on immigration, on small business policy, all the things. This world of 140 character social media posts, they don't enable us to share our values, to share our lived experiences, and they force us into these boxes. And the work that I do, I really want to break that down. I think you all deserve, all 20 of you in this room deserve to tell your full story, and equally I deserve to hear it. And so does everybody else in this Zoom room. I've also learned that language really matters. The words we use can include or exclude immediately. So that exercise I shared with you called third to first person, narrative 4 actually calls it story exchange. And when I was workshopping this dialogue, the pilot a few years ago, I kept calling it story exchange. I got some pushback. People said to me, I don't want to come and hold hands with people and share stories. I'm not interested. So then I just rebranded it. I called it third to first person, and I have never gotten any pushback since. It sounds more like scientific or quantitative. And also, of course, representation matters. If we're talking with people in a room that all have the same point of view, we're just in an echo chamber. And then finally, unexpected needs and themes emerge. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a dialogue thinking it would go this way when something else surfaces, bubbles to the top as a need in the local community. And that's actually the real issue, not the other thing we thought we were going to talk about. And finally, people are really hungry for connection. I realize people keep asking for these dialogues because we live in such a time-strapped world, and it's so rare when we have time to have deep conversations with others. And so when we have them, it's like they're so refreshing and they're so rewarding, and so informative, when we can get beyond position statements. I'm going to close by saying, something I've already said. People say, well, what do you want to see happen next? And what I want to see happen next is anytime I get invited to speak to a club or a community group, I say, I want all of you in this room. I want every Rotarian to participate in a dialogue. Participate in one, host one, because if we make more time in our lives, in our systems, in our structures, in Rotary, in our communities, in government, in wherever you call community, if we make more time in our lives for dialogue, deep dialogue, and we make it accessible to people, we do it where people already convene, I think we would have a more peaceful world, you know? Imagine if every college student, every high school student experienced a dialogue as part of their learning. Imagine if in our places of work we had dialogues. How would that change the way we interact with each other and the way we listen to each other, and then the kinds of solutions we might create together? And so I'm going to close by saying that, I hope that we all have the courage to have really big, deep conversations with each other and have conversations that make us uncomfortable, because I think they make us learn and they make us see different points of view. And I think they make us better. And I'm really proud to share that Rotary has fully embraced this. I'm just showing you some examples. This is a virtual dialogue that some Rotary clubs wanted to have. So we literally convene people across the country. This is an example of a Rotary conference where we actually facilitated a dialogue and the next day trained people. These are Rotary leaders to actually go and facilitate dialogues in their communities. And as an example, today when I was speaking to this Rotaract group in Spain, I brought somebody else with me into the call. Her name is April. She's in the photo on the left-hand side. She's got like this black shirt with the dots on it. And I've trained her to facilitate years ago. And she was saying to us today, oh yeah, we've got like 4 dialogues happening in our community coming up with the local Rotary Club, with the local environmental group, with the local so on and so forth. And so not only can we have dialogue together, but if more people are trained to host these dialogues, it's like this multiplier effect. And it's so beautiful to see this becoming sort of a lifestyle for other people too, having hard, courageous conversations so we can create different kinds of solutions together. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions, have a conversation with you. If you're done and tired of my voice, happy to also like end the call. I'm going to pass back to you, Jim.
No, you, let's see, am I, no, I'm not muted. But anyway, no, you can't go away. There's too much. We are open for questions. Would anybody like to ask questions? I love the plate idea, which is a great, simple way to create a bond, to create an agreement, very subtle way. It's an excellent routine.
I also recognize that I shared a lot, so you might be processing. You might also
We
be
are.
dinner. That's okay too.
And would you like to share where your place, where do you belong?
Oh yeah, gosh. I feel really lucky. I feel like I belong in a lot of places. Here in my community in Fremont and Seattle, in Vancouver, BC, Canada, where I went to college and then, created a very solid community there. I'm part of the Global Partners in Peace Rotary Club. We're a virtual club, and we are a community of former Rotary Peace Fellows. We meet twice a month. You're very welcome to join a meeting as a guest if you'd like. I'd say those are some of the key places where I feel I belong.
That would be fun. Now, the Rotary Peace Fellow program is a master's level program. What was your bachelor's in?
Oh, yeah. The Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. You know, people joke that that's not helpful, but I found it helpful.
One comment, very useful information. I will definitely be following up to see about doing some dialogues here in Southwest Georgia. And that would work very well with the IEP material. So that would be great to, it all kind of fits together when you understand the pillars.
Yeah, actually, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I can comment on that, Laura. So every 2 years, I go to Durham because the intercountry committee between France and USA, they have a convening every 2 years. 1 year it's in the States, 1 year it's in France. It alternates back and forth. And whenever it's in Durham, I've done it like 3 times now. They create a 2-day program where on the first day, let's see, was that the order? On the first day, I can't remember which order it was. Maybe I hosted a full day dialogue workshop first, and then the second day IEP ran their program because they do what's the word? They have beautiful synergy. Yeah. So
Great.
it works.
But do you ever have challenges breaking through the emotional commitments of some people? A lot of emotional commitments come from groupthink.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'll say to that is people don't really know what they're getting into when they come to one of our dialogues. Because we crowdsource the issues. We say in advance, what do you want to talk about? And so, let's see, what's an example? In Turkey, in Istanbul, the Presidential Peace Conference, we did a bit of a survey, a pre-survey of some folks, and they said we want to talk about safety, stability, conflict, which makes sense at a global peace conference. Or when we ran this pilot that I told you about, we crowdsourced the issues. They wanted to talk about education, migration, and Confederate statues, which is a hot topic, right? So we always make sure the topics are relevant to the community. And then we just tell them, show up for the day. These are the things we're going to talk about. We don't tell them about the techniques because you can imagine, right? If we try to explain in writing or even verbally, like how does third to first person work? It's too much. It might turn people off. So we do kind of surprise people. They don't really know what they're getting into, which might be part of the reason why when they walk away from it, they feel so transformational. It's just like nothing they never experienced before. And so that's one thing. And then secondly, I'll say the emotional investment, I mean, generally people who show up for these are open to having conversation. If you opt in, then you're already open to some extent to having conversation, maybe not as deep as we go. You don't realize we're going to go that deep. And so in those cases, sometimes we do, as part of the planning, depending on what we're going to talk about, we do work with the community organizer or host to bring in other resources if needed. So, I remember we did a youth dialogue, and we talked about should we have like counselors on site so that during the lunch break or after, these resources are available. I've only ever had one person walk out of a dialogue, and I've facilitated like dialogues for more than 2,000 people by now. And when I hear from other facilitators that work with me, it's very rare when somebody's like so, what's the word? Worked up about something that they leave, but I've had it happen once, and that's okay. It happens. So that was a long answer, but I think the short answer is people who opt into these conversations are open to them. And so therefore that emotional piece has never been too big of an issue.
Linda, thank you. Peter Schultz has a question. Peter, you are muted. Peter?
I love your sign, Tom.
Tom Baker has a question.
I love your
Yes.
sign. That's hysterical. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah. Hi, Linda. So I can see from this process that you use for dialogue, you're really helping to raise assumptions, build understanding, and the feedback you've gotten is how much people have learned about themselves and others. But people are kind of task oriented. So when you give a topic, what's the outcome of your dialogue? Do you end up with a product, some agreement, or is it just it's just the dialogue part? You don't get into any discussion.
Yeah, it depends. It's mostly the dialogue part, because if you're tackling really big issues, you can never get through it in one conversation, right? I mean, sure, maybe if it's about choosing where we're gonna eat dinner, sure. But like Confederate statues, land rights, I mean, one dialogue is not gonna fix that. But what it does do is it creates space to see each other differently and a common platform from which to move forward. So that's sort of the basic outcome of these dialogues. However, we have worked with communities to architect them more so they are more outcome driven, Tom. So as an example, we did a dialogue with the local government water agency in North Carolina. There was a really big conflict with a community where the water reservoir was, and the water agency they wanted to go in and manage some of the land around the water reservoir, which meant, like, for them, managed burns, removing uh, um, some dead trees, things like that. And the community was very opposed to it. So what we did in that instance was we architected much more differently, and it was a series of conversations. It wasn't just one. And we went in, the water agency said, well, we have these guiding principles. Before we do anything, these are the guiding principles that we're going to use, like do no harm to your land, save the animals. I don't remember them. This was a while ago, but do you know what I mean? And then we brought in, it was like 80 people at this community meeting. So we had 8 facilitators. We typically do, if it's live, at least in person, 10 people per facilitator. And we workshop these guiding principles. Like, how do you feel? And in each circle of 10, we had an environmental expert. So like a professional forest manager from Duke, somebody from Sierra Club. So there was an expert in the room, right? And also each circle had a representative from the water agency. So everyone was hearing each other. And they talked to, each circle worked through these guiding principles, yes or no, and what do you want to see differently? So new guiding principles were co-created. And then we asked one volunteer from each circle, so somebody from the community in each circle. We all regrouped, all 80 of us in a giant room. So, okay, let's have one volunteer from each group report back what you discussed. And to ensure transparency, we had somebody scribing, documenting on a poster board everything that was discussed. So one person stood up for each group and shared. And then the executive director of that agency, water agency, said, like, just reflected back on what he heard. Okay, I heard you say this is important. I heard you say this guiding principle. Yes, I heard you say this guiding principle. You're not so for that. And he reflected back to them what he heard and made a commitment to say, okay, we're going to go back to our, house or office or whatever, rework these. Then we're going to come back to you and talk with you again. And we want to do it actually in place. So then a smaller subset of that community met actually physically on the lands that they wanted to manage and talked about and looked at and touched the things. So it was real and tactical, and then talked about the guiding principles. So that is a whole other level, though, of work. So yes, it's possible, and that takes a lot more work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Peter, you have a question.
I'm sorry, I could not unmute myself before, but I figured out how to do it. Thank you very much for that
Welcome.
great talk, that great presentation. I was just curious, do you know of efforts like this being made over in Israel, Palestine, between Palestinians and Israelis.
I don't know if it's exactly like this. I do know that lots of groups are trying to facilitate um, conversations, bridges through mutual aid, um, through policy change. I mean, so many people are working on this incredibly hard issue. But and certainly I'm certain tons of nonprofits are trying to facilitate dialogue, or that can be in the I know there's some people that do youth exchanges, things like that, but specific conversations like this, I haven't heard of that happening. I think it's partly because people are just trying to survive. That's one part of it. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. We,
Thank you.
we welcome Vasanti and Vivek from India. Now it's what, 7 a.m.? Or it was. Vivek, do you have any questions that you would like to ask? And if not, and Vasanti, welcome. You came in late and missed a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Sorry, I go through the presentation. Thank you.
No problem. It's always recorded. We did record. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I think what I'll say is, I'd asked you, do you have a place where you belong? And I want to come back to that and say, you belong here. I hope your answer was yes. And if not, and even if yes, you belong here in this community that we've created tonight, in the community I understand you meet every month, when you belong in Rotary. So
We belong, and the forum has helped build community. We've been very fortunate at that, and you've been a wonderful part of it this evening, creating many ideas on how we can expand this. And we thank you very, very much for everything that you bring and everything that you do and everything that you are. We are very proud that you agreed to be a Rotary Peace Fellow. This is what it's all about. Thank you very much. We are indeed grateful for the work that you do to better the world and the information you bring. We also thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. I do want to share, next month, we're going to be honored to have Chick Dambak. Chick helped bring peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia a decade ago, as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's been the president CEO of Peace Corps. He has recently retired as faculty member of Johns Hopkins and American universities. According to Chick, this will be our last opportunity for anyone to hear him speak publicly. His health is slowing him down and he has stopped doing presentations, but in his words, he agreed to do one more time. He is so passionate about Rotary. So Chick Dombach, who all the returned Peace Fellows know him very well, and he's been quite active. It'll be quite a presentation. Linda, we are blessed with what you do and what you bring. And yes, we have so much more in common as the simple plates demonstrate as you put them on the floor. The similarity of all of our plates are very, very close. We thank you for creating a wonderful opportunity.
great. Thank you for having me. Take care of yourselves. Have a good evening. Bye.